Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. Can I start by sharing something with you that just blew me away? Just changed my life. So for those of you who tuned in last week, you know that I channeled the AO. And I also sang. Well, I was really nervous about singing because I don't really sing, I guess, except when I'm channeling them because they're big singers. But I definitely had never recorded it or sent it out. So my audio engineer and I have been working together for years now. He's done both audiobooks. He's done all the podcast episodes. But even so, we've never really directly talked about the fact that I channel. Sort of just, this is what the show is, and I leave it at that. Because I never wanted him to feel pressured, like believing that I channel was like a criteria for us to be able to work together. And I don't know what his beliefs are. I know he's very devout, and that's about it. And he's asked a couple questions maybe over the years, but we sort of just leave it professional. We're just talking about the audio. Well, when I sent him over this last episode, I said, hey, the channeled message came through today as a melody. And I felt like I wasn't going to be true to the message if I didn't sing. So I sang. So here's the timestamps for the 3 singing parts. And if you could work some magic on it, that would be great. And if I still think it's not good quality, maybe I'll edit it out, but I figured we'd try. But then, I just left it at that. And I even said in the message, and I was like, and no one has to believe that it is channeled. It's just the way that came through. So he works on the edit, and he was so encouraging about the singing and encouraged me to always be my authentic self. He's awesome like that. So he sends the final episode back, and then he sends this message. FYI. When someone questions what you're doing, have them listen with good headphones while you channel. Not only can I hear a change in the voice, let alone the voicing, but you can actually hear multiple voices, as in multiple sets of vocal cords going on. That's in the recording you sent me. So either there's something weird happening throughout the editing and rendering process, or there's something being captured during the recording. Can you believe that? He didn't have to send that. Man, it just hit deep. That kind of validation. Like we weren't talking about the message or if it resonated or whatever. It's just the audio. And he's like, I hear multiple sets of vocal cords in the audio. And this is a guy who's been doing this for decades. He can tell when there's a different voice. Anyways. Just blew me away. So, you met the AO. You can probably tell, just in that one little snippet, they're a little different than the chorus, aren't they? The chorus sort of has this expansive, horizon-wide feeling of love to them. And the AO sometimes feels so similar and yet so powerful. So like, whoa, where's this coming from? Particularly some of the deeper voices. I brought through a deeper voice towards the end of the episode. And sometimes the energy that comes through with some of their aspects is palpable. I didn't give a lot of preamble to the episode in the description because I wanted the entire thing to unfold in the episode itself to give you an opportunity of being that warrior of presence that they always talk about. Sometimes we're going to come into these sorts of encounters or interactions without preparation. because we are stepping into these new and different frequencies that supersede those mental concepts of shuffling things around in our physical reality. We're going to be just kind of jumping into these frequencies. It's not to say that you are not prepared. You are. That's why you're in those frequencies, because you resonated into them, you vibrated into them, you expanded. And also, we're doing this in a unique way where we are expanding from the perspective of the five senses. So there will be a part of us that is resonant in this perspective still. And that's a different kind of balance. It's a different kind of surfboard. It's a different kind of way of holding steady across multiple frequencies at once. So sometimes I step out into these different frequencies and I would totally eat sand, fall flat on my face. It would be awful. I would be pitched into depression because the energy got wonky and I felt so much, but I was thinking so much, or got pitched into something else. And the AO is sort of nearby in those frequencies where they would kind of maybe give me advice on how to look at the sand differently and how to connect with its consciousness. And that's their perspective. And then the chorus would sort of say, "Oh, beloved, you're doing so great. What's an energetic definition of sand?" So you see, they're different in that way. They're both loving. They're both connective aspects. But the chorus is kind of looking at all of us in the sandbox. And the AO sort of has a similar but different perspective on what we're going through, where I maybe only see tiny granules of rock that I'm flailing around in the sandbox, and they might sing to it and make it into a totally new structure. But we are both in an experience of the sand. The AO has been my constant companions since they showed up in Chaco Canyon. What's fascinating about the way it's unfolded with the AO is that the chorus had sort of an instantaneous understanding of who I was through an energetic connection by their description. That is the way they have described it. Once I opened to the connection, it was like a total download for them. With the AO, however, there has been this practically human process of getting to know each other, of starting to feel out the other's perspective, even though they see so much more of us energetically through that heart-based connection and communication. It's not that totality type of download that the chorus has. It was sort of requisite that I was already to a place of openness and trust by the time I encountered them, because I had to take each conversation as open-hearted as I was at the beginning. Judgments definitely did crop up along the way. There were definitely things they did or said in the beginning, and I would be like, I guess this is what they are. And I would remember many of the chorus's teachings, and I would watch my mind sort of start to try to pin them down into something, and would release that over and over and over again. Like, cool, I see you, mind, doing what you do. That's a really good point. That could be true. But then the next time I stepped into a communication with them, it was sort of like all the doors were open again, because that is that open-hearted place in which they communicate. This does require a great deal of trust, we would say, but presence, they would say. So I step back into a present moment sense of the situation that is timeless. So I'm not worried about what happens next or where I need to go next or whatever. I sort of just open into, I'm right where I need to be. And that's where I can hear them most clearly. They have a definite participation in what's going on here. Whereas the chorus is sort of like, you're all doing great, shouting out from the bandstands. The AO is in it with us in some way. In some ways, very literally, they talk about a shared moment in our histories where some of us made this choice to sort of venture into this experience of disconnection, as they sometimes call it, or the oncoming storm, as they sometimes call it. Or, they talk about a force, a civilization, a presence that showed up that we went out to meet. And then also they're participating here in a figurative way too. They talk about the movement of civilizations, the galaxies, of realities, and how there's a natural dance and flow to the universe and that we are all part of this. They ebb and flow between there are things to sort of show up for and to face. Almost like a human, there are things to do, except they don't focus on the do, they focus on the showing up. They alternate between that and then also this sort of complete surrender. Not even surrender, because we have a tone in that when we say that, it's sort of like a relinquishing. They have a complete and total view of multiple forces that come into play dynamically. It's a type of like total trust fall into a situation that feels to us like, total surrender or a moment of Zen, but theirs is dynamic. It's active. They're not just sitting around sort of meditating. In fact, they never sit around. They think we are extremely sedentary. And I sense in them sometimes it just boggles their mind how much we sit still. They crack jokes when we're on the freeway about like, look at them. Like they're sitting in cars now. When they first started coming through and seeing our reality through my heart, they say, not through eyesight. They see it through my energetic perceptions, which feels a lot like looking through my eyeballs, but there's some difference there that I don't really understand. So when they come through my heart, they can see what's going on. And you can feel sometimes their bafflement at how did it get like this? In the beginning, their sensation was one of intense grief. I will be honest, as I described in that Chaco Canyon episode. And there are other situations that I've been in with them in that earlier phase that I will probably explain or describe at some point. But the emotions in the beginning were definitely representative of their first glimpse of this reality by their explanation after that departure. So now, depending on the way we're looking at this, either we departed or they departed. In some ways, I understand the they departed idea of this better because there seems to be places here in our reality that are reflective of places in their reality, but those places here have been destroyed. So it's sort of like they left, kind of. You could look at it this way. We divided the energetic house like we talked about in that episode. They went off and then they came back reconnecting to us now. And they're getting a glimpse of how it went after that, departure. And they're like, whoa, we didn't know that disconnection could be this bad. So I'll be honest, the first many ancient sites that I went to with them, I cried a lot. Like a lot. Like at one point, like hitting the sand on my knees. Like sobbing as I felt all of their grief in realizing just how far it had gone. It was an incredible experience because, I'm just on a hike in the middle of the Western United States. And it's a beautiful day to me. And I think these rock formations are interesting. And then I feel them come through. And not only do I feel their wave of sadness, but as I start to realize what it is that they are seeing and how different it is for them, without even actually seeing their reality, if you know what I mean, just feeling the emotional difference between the constructions or the harmonies that used to exist in that place that I was standing in, I also was grieving. Over time, it became interesting because they almost acclimated. I could feel them sort of adjust to the idea that this had happened and this was now the current situation. It was almost an aspect of linear time, like this, then that, which was amazing to me because the chorus is never progressed in that stepwise fashion. But the AO had clearly connected with me, gotten to see these places, was blown away by how much had been disconnected, and then sort of got their game faces on and was ready for what was next. And I felt that evolution in them after visiting a half dozen or so sites, maybe more. Can't remember them all right now, to be honest. So once they got their game faces on, I could feel their personalities shift in some ways into, okay, let's like figure out where you're at and figure out how this is working. And that's where I definitely felt aspects of their personalities. So again, personality to me now feels very physical because in hanging out with the chorus, there's such like a giant universe of love. There isn't anything so specific feeling as a personality. I know personalities to us feel like a kind of big thing because it's a whole person's personality. But when you start expanding into energetic frequencies where more is presented, the fine specifics of a person's personality, like their quirks, the way they say something, the way they dress, the way they whatever, feels kind of like artifacts of this reality. Because so much of our personalities are based on the lives we have lived here. I grew up here. I had these siblings, or I had this family. I had these friends. I grew up in this era. We all wore neon pink. You know, it sort of is all formed in the course of these experiences, minus, you know, what you show up as, of course. I'm not calling into question the nature versus nurture thing. Like it's all bundled up here. But you showed up as your consciousness here in this game piece. And then, you know, lived the game piece life. And sometimes the aspects of the game piece are sort of like personality stuff. You have expressed your unique self uniquely through that game piece. And those connections will be tied across lifetimes. Like, look at that. You were still sort of you here and here and here. Like, look at you as a Roman and look at you as an Egyptian. Like, it's still kind of you. That's crazy. We'll get to that point. But for now, there is sort of this difference between the chorus's vastness that encompasses all those things and all the game board and everybody around here versus Katie and the things I believe and the aspects of my personality in this version of me. So when the AO sort of started to express their personalities, it was like, what? Like, check that, back it up, repeat. Did you guys just say something like that? You know, I was sort of in the background, mentally blown away by the things I was seeing and feeling about them. Because here we were having a heartfelt, direct, energetic connection. And yet I could feel things about them that felt like a friend, felt like a personality. Remember, the Course always says, look to beliefs first. Because then you're not so distracted by like, oh my God, they live in that era and we live in this era. It's so different. If you look first to the beliefs, I could already feel in our interactions, man, there has to be a lot of really similar things that we believe and a ton that we don't. But there were so many connections right out of the gate that it was both easy and challenging at the same time. I remember one time we were going on a hike and I was starting to listen to them as I'm walking through the woods and they're teaching me about like the woods and the consciousnesses and be aware and expand your senses and whatever. And I had been on a few hikes with them by now. And at each river crossing or stream crossing, they would have me ask permission. Now, in a human perspective, if you go on a hike where there's a lot of stream crossings, we would probably be like, okay, but I asked at the first one. So does that cover like all the other 20 streams we're about to cross, right? There's this response of efficiency that maybe we don't even really recognize in ourselves until we're put in this kind of position. So anyways, I'm hiking with them and I know this. I know that they ask permission for streams. But I get to, it was like the second or the third stream. And I sort of like hesitated, like, do I really have to? And it was kind of funny because I could feel them be like, why would she think she doesn't? It was a total difference between my priorities in this version of the game, which are for survival and efficiency and getting things done. And clearly I'm on this hike to go accomplish something. Like the crossing of the rivers is not like the thing. It's the thing on the way to the thing. And so my five senses brain is focused on the thing we're trying to get to with only so many hours of daylight left. And they're sort of like, does she think the water spirits left? You can feel their sort of like, what has happened to them? Like, how disconnected can you get? It's sort of like walking through a crowd and I have said hi to the first 2 or 3 people. So why do I need to say hi to the rest of the people? And they're like, this is clearly a different stream. Like there are clearly different beings in this water. So yes, I definitely had to kneel down and ask for permission. Now I could do it in a much faster way than maybe the first time because I understood what I was feeling for and what I was offering. And I could feel a response through them in a way that I hadn't been able to in the beginning. But you can see this difference, can't you? Okay, so I'll give you another example. So one time I was really focused on preparing for something. I had lists. I was gathering stuff. I was going to Costco. I was going to the grocery store. I was thinking things through and I was trying to stay in the moment. But man, I could really feel my five senses brain being like this and this. So I was like, okay, I'm doing pretty good, really, because this is sort of a high stakes situation. And I feel what my five senses brain wants to do, but also I'm not really getting caught up in it. I don't feel frenzied or frantic. I'm just like, okay, we'll go do this now. We'll go do this now. And at one point in one of the evenings, the AO came through to talk about something. And they sort of acknowledged what they had been watching me do because they are kind of observing of my heart all the time. It is like having track coaches with me and they're not intrusive. And there are long periods where they sort of maybe kind of disappear if there's nothing to be done or I'm not calling them, so to speak. But anyway, so they sort of acknowledge this way that I have been preparing for something as they're telling me about this other topic. They're coaching me basically on the motion of the universe and creation and how to feel into that more and expand your senses. And so they say, trust this motion. Trust your senses and your connection to things as you move through a situation. Stop hoarding things and then sitting on it like a turtle. They didn't say it that feisty. They said it in their beautiful connective way. They use a lot of nature analogies, so here was their nature analogy tonight was, stop sitting on it like a turtle. And I got this vision of me sort of like crouched over all of my supplies, hunkered over it, protecting it with my turtle shell. They sent over this vision. And I was so sort of taken aback and I saw their point. At the same time that I was sort of like, well, how else does one prepare for a hurricane? So, sort of felt their connectedness, but also was still very much alive in my five senses perspective. And my five senses mind had a very rational question to respond with. So we worked it out. We kept talking. One time we were looking at maps because I had been going places with them. And I wanted to understand what they thought about the way things were laid out here. So I open up a map and I show it to them. And they were so offended's not the right word. They were so disappointed almost in the way that this two-dimensional drawing of their incredible connected earth and universe was. It felt almost blasphemous to them that I was like, this is Florida and here's the ocean. And then what happens? They practically threw up their hands and were like, we can't even engage with you on this one. It would take us hours to describe to you the changes you would need to make to this map to to adequately explain the energy and the structures of what goes on here. And they actually made me close the book. So I closed the book and I'm like, okay, but where do you start? And they were sort of like, well, first you start with what you feel, not what's on a paper. And they described to me the ways in which we stay in our lines. And they pointed out our concept of roads. And they said, you don't understand how much these roads are your fences. You're kept on all of these fence lines. They keep you in fences. Your perspective isn't expanding. It's not connecting to the trees on the side of the road or the air in the sky or any of the energies in between or any of the beings in between. You get put in a box in a car where you sit still, and then you get driven in these fenced in areas by their view. Now, we wouldn't consider a road a fence. We would consider the fence on the side of the road, maybe the fence, but the road is just the way to get there. In fact, we have so many metaphors and analogies about roads, right? Roads bring us to places, as we talk about a lot this season in distance. We travel the road. And here they were saying, wait a second, we have a completely different concept of distance, which never requires this kind of road. The path is everything in the universe. You can walk, you can move through so much more than you think that you can. And this is where I caught a glimpse of their ideas of movement and have really started to understand so many things since about the ways in which they are constantly in motion, fueled in a sustained way by the energy of creation itself. They are the kinds of runners that can do thousands of miles and never tire. They are the kinds of flyers who could fly all over the world and never get winded, because the motion itself is sustenance to them. And sitting still is actually could be construed as a type of starvation. You are disconnected. You're not in motion with creation. You're not in motion with the universe. Go out and connect to things. That's how you sustain yourself. I look at so many things differently now after hanging out with them. In fact, sometimes it's hard to be normal. And isn't that strange? Because maybe I should have said that years ago with channeling the chorus. Like, here I am channeling this big old energy and, I'm not normal. I definitely felt the difference between the chorus as love and day-to-day life here. And that stretch, that distance was definitely difficult to hold at times. But I still felt like through all these years, a pretty normal human just trying to figure it out. But ever since I've met the AO, there has been a change. Their beliefs are so close to ours and yet so slightly different that it is at times as though my beliefs are shifting as opposed to spanning. With the chorus, I spanned the distance. But with the AO, it definitely feels like I move into their perspective and then back again. And there are times as I come back into these frequencies that I have to really remember. What is it we thought about driving cars here? Why does that make sense again? Oh yeah, okay, because it's too far. It's too far to go on foot. We don't have time for that or we would get tired. I have to remind myself of our physical limitations here. Because you spend so much time in a slightly different viewpoint, it's a little more allowing and a little more expanded. And suddenly, or gradually, the logic of our limitations here starts to erode. Can I still, with effort, remember why these limitations make sense based on our current laws of physics and the way that things work here? Yes, I can. It is a choice, though, to remember it. Whereas before, I just was always human reaching for the chorus. Now it feels like I am actually moving. all the time between this belief system and a different belief system. And I can kind of come back and forth as I please, but I am choosing at times to remember, to reconnect to, by the Course's definition of memory, to connect to the way that we think about things here. In this case, distance would be a choice. And to cross that distance is also a choice. So you can see how, as we all do this, as we all go forward and meet these slightly different belief systems, and as we expand from this way of thinking about things outward, as we acclimate to, hey, that's the way they look at this, and this is the way I look at this, and now I've got two perspectives, and I can choose between them, you can see how you might be able to express yourself very differently in this reality. Because now you can choose to think like the AO and move your body all day long and feel invigorated the entire time. Or you can move it like a limited 5 senses human that by the end of the day is weary and tired because you have a finite set of energy and it has been used up by the physical actions themselves. And the distance between these two belief systems, or the many belief systems that you will be able to access, will also feel smaller and smaller. So much so that in the course of a single hike, you could admire the rocks that you are looking at from our 5 senses perspective, and also switch over into a different belief system where you can interact with those things directly using energetic tools that you are starting to recall. Did I know all of this on day 1? The first day that I talked to the AO? No. And I'm still learning all sorts of things every time we connect. I have found that moving forward in these types of unknown situations is the best way to expand into different viewpoints. We could stand still and say, tell me everything that you are right now, and then I'll decide if I can trust you. And that is one way of going about it. Or we could also say, why don't we walk together? And I bet on the way, I will learn all about how you move. We love you infinitely. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.